Hey everyone, I'm your host Peter Zablocki, and you're listening to History Shorts. I hope everyone's having a great day so far, and thank you for making this show a small part of that. If you'd like to help me out with a small gesture, please leave History Shorts a rating or a review, and click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. For sources and books used as the basis for these episodes, how to advertise on a show, and other information such as a list of our upcoming guests on the Conversation series, or a link to our Patreon account where you can find exclusive episodes not heard here, please visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate podcast listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now and take your podcast experience to the next level. Having said all of that, in the twilight of his life, Francisco de Goya, Spain's most celebrated painter, created works so unsettling, so dark, and so personal that he never intended the public to see them. Known today as the Black Paintings, these 14 murals were not hung in palaces or cathedrals. They were not even commissioned by a single person. They were painted directly onto the walls of his own home, La Quinta del Sordo, the House of the Deaf Man, between 1819 and 1823. The paintings would not be displayed to the world until decades after his death, when they were removed from the crumbling walls and transferred to canvas. By then, their creators' brushstrokes had long been silent, leaving art historians, psychologists, and viewers alike to wonder. What was Goya trying to say? Were these works the product of genius, madness, or both? Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
By the time Goya began the Black Paintings, his life had been marked by profound personal and political upheaval. Born in 1746, he had risen from modest beginnings to become the court painter to King Charles IV. Over the decades, he produced portraits that flattered Spain's elite. Yet his work also revealed a sharp, satirical edge, most famously in his etching series, Los Caprichos, which critiqued superstition, corruption, and the follies of mankind. But the world around him was changing violently. The Napoleonic Wars and the Peninsular War between 1808 and 1814 devastated most of Spain. Goya witnessed executions, massacres, and famine, scenes he immortalized in his harrowing Disasters of War prints. These experiences eroded his faith in humanity and deepened his political cynicism. Adding to the turmoil was his own health. Around 1793, Goya suffered a severe illness, possibly lead poisoning or syphilis, that left him permanently deaf. This sensory isolation may have intensified his inward turn, fostering a more personal, often nightmarish vision in his art. By 1819, now in his 70s, Goya was living in seclusion at La Quinta del Sordo. Spain was once again under the oppressive rule of King Ferdinand VII, whose restoration to the throne brought political repression and fear. In this atmosphere of personal frailty and national despair, Goya began covering the plaster walls of his dining and sitting rooms with images that would haunt posterity. The Black Paintings are not a coherent narrative cycle like a traditional fresco program. Instead, they seem to be fragments of nightmares, potentially his, each mural depicting a different vision of horror, absurdity, or mystery. Painted in dark, earthly tones with violent brushwork, they reflect none of the courtly elegance of his earlier career. Saturn Devouring His Son is perhaps the most infamous of the set. A painting showing the Titan Saturn, his eyes wide with madness, gripping the limp body of his child, whose head and one arm are already missing. Blood drips from Saturn's hands and mouth. The myth, drawn from Roman lore, speaks of a father who eats his children to prevent them from overthrowing him, a chilling metaphor for tyranny, fear, and self-destruction. Then there is the witch's Sabbath, a grotesque goat-headed figure, possibly the devil, presiding over a coven of haggard, deformed witches. The scene brims with superstition, echoing Goya's earlier fascination with witchcraft, but now stripped of any satirical playfulness. It is pure, oppressive darkness. These are followed by the painting called The Dog, a stark, enigmatic image showing the head of a small dog peering upward, half submerged in an expanse of blackness. The emptiness around the animal suggests drowning, entrapment, or abandonment. Its ambiguity makes it one of the most haunting images in the series. The last two of the more disturbing ones are the two old men eating soup and the fight with cudgels. In the former, two elderly, skeletal figures lean over a bowl. One stares with hollow eyes, the other's mouth gapes in a grimace. The scene is grotesque, yet pitiful, a meditation of decay and hunger. In the fight with cudgels, two men, up to their knees in earth and sand, swing heavy sticks at one another. Whether they are fighting to death or engaged in a futile struggle, that's unclear. The composition, however, feels claustrophobic, a grim metaphor for human conflict. Each of the works mentioned are stripped of any decorative detail, the backgrounds often void or oppressive, the figures rendered in broad, coarse strokes. They seem less concerned with depicting physical reality than with expressing internal states, such as fear, rage, despair, and alienation. Unlike his royal portraits or public commissions, the black paintings were deeply personal. Goya never titled them, never wrote about them, and never displayed them to anyone. As mentioned, painted directly on the plaster with oil pigments, they were meant for his own eyes only, or perhaps for the small circle of friends who visited him at La Quinta del Sordo. Why he painted them remains a matter of speculation. Some historians see them as a direct response to Spain's political repression under Ferdinand VII, their grotesque figures standing in for a society corrupted and brutalized. Others interpret them as the product of Goya's own declining health and possible mental illness, expressions of depression, anxiety, and even hallucination. It is also possible that they were a fusion of both, the personal and the political, blending in images where human cruelty, superstition, and death intermingle. After Goya's death in 1828, the black paintings remained in La Quinta del Sordo, which passed through several owners. By the late 19th century, the works were in danger of being lost entirely. The house was deteriorating, and the murals, never designed to last in the first place, were flaking and fading. In the 1870s, Baron Émile d'Erlanger, a wealthy French banker who owned the property, commissioned art restorers to transfer the paintings from plaster to canvas, a delicate process that inevitably altered them slightly. Some scholars believe details and colors were lost or changed during the transfer, making it difficult to know exactly how Goya's originals appeared. D'Erlanger eventually donated the canvases to the Spanish state in 1881, and they entered the collection at the museum in Madrid, where they remain to this day, still exerting a hypnotic, unsettling pull on their viewers. The black paintings resist simple interpretation. Their power lies partially in their ambiguity. Are they purely personal nightmares, or do they encode political allegory? Is Saturn a timeless mythic warning, or is he a stand-in for a tyrant devouring his own people? The dog, a symbol of hope amid despair, or a portrait of helplessness? For modern audiences, these works feel astonishingly contemporary. Their rough textures, Distorted forms and emotional rawness anticipate elements of expressionism and surrealism. Artists like Pablo Picasso drew inspiration from Goya's unflinching confrontation with the darker side of the human condition. In 1824, weary of Spain's political climate, Goya left for Bordeaux, France, where he lived quietly until his death 4 years later. He never returned to La Quinta del Sordo, and never again painted anything quite like the black paintings. It is tempting to imagine him in those final years, far from the oppressive walls he had filled with such visions, walking through the French countryside in a measure of peace. Yet the legacy of these images remains tied to his name, proof that art can be a vessel, not only for beauty, but for the deepest, most disturbing truths of the human soul. Thanks for listening.